The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong to the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brigham Young University or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. And thank you to all of you for waking up early enough to be here and finding this corner of campus. I'm not a BYU Cougar alum, but I love BYU, and I admit to a few GPS peaks to find this building. So I blame it on the big hole in the ground that used to be the building that I was in last year. But it's really just a thrill to be here with you. As a funny start, when I came to Education Week last year, it was a first for me, and it was such an amazing experience, particularly meeting, including some of you, and gaining a lot of insights outside of those who came and listened to me blab for 55 minutes a few times. But when I decided to come back this year, I had made one of the mistakes that I hope you don't make often in your marriages, which is I made the decision of what my class should be called before asking my wife what she thought. And we all need those honest critics that love us enough to tell us like it is, but yet are the most ardent and consistent fans. And that's definitely my wife. And I have to tell you the story today because she'll be here tomorrow. So it's all bets are off for the rest of the week. But I'd made the title, and then the book came out, so it was done, right? The program booklet, and she says, "Oh, what's your class called?" And she looked at the other classes, and she said, "That's not very compelling." And I thought, I hope someone thinks differently. So the fact that you're all here for whatever reason, dragged here, or whatever other attractive force, I'm grateful. And let's prove my wife wrong, okay? At least once in my whole life. Let's do it. So a little bit about me for the 39, I guess it was the almost 60% that had not been to the class last year. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona originally. I joined the church as a young teenager, and I served a mission in Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, not only was it, as with most people, the most utterly defining experience of my life, but to the great rattling of my nerves, my mission president and his wife are here today, and that's awfully intimidating. So I'm super grateful for the influence they continue to have on my life and for what my mission did for my life. I'm married. My wife is by far the better half, the miracle, as it was for at least one other attendee. And my three children will begrudgingly be dragged here tomorrow morning. So if you're back, you'll see them, and they'll be here the rest of the week. I've lived all over the country for various reasons, and I'm now a professor at Duke University in electrical and computer engineering and chemistry. And I love studying the intersection of science and the gospel. I love light. We'll talk a little bit about light, not exclusively about light this time. So an intro to this series, if you look at the week, and particularly for those who are crazy enough, kind enough, merciful enough to come multiple days to this class, I want to give you a feel for what I hope it brings together across the 4 lectures. And these are the questions that were in my mind in developing it. Have you ever known something with certainty only to find yourself questioning it years later? How about having curiosity about rectifying things related to gospel truth with scientific truth, or maintaining clarity with respect to the spiritual influences in life amidst the noise that the world is continuously presenting to us, okay? So if the answer to any of those are yes, me too. And that is at the heart of this lecture series. So if you want to see how it's broken down in at least a slightly graphical sense, Today we will talk about, and today's lecture, like I said a moment ago, is the only one that's going to have some overlap with last year's class, the first class of last year, if you attended, because it's kind of a good groundwork for us to build from. So I'm going to have some new material, but a lot of what we covered there. But then tomorrow we're going to talk about chatbots and artificial intelligence, and what do we do with this technology, and how is it able to be used when it comes to gospel learning. And then on Thursday, we'll talk about that noise that I mentioned and how to find truth amidst the noise. And then finally, we'll wrap it up on Friday with addressing this age-old question of how do I know that I know? So resource-wise, I'll tell you, this year was a new one for me coming back here a second time, because I now knew what to anticipate. And that was almost more of a curse than a blessing, because I realized a lot of my prep last year was far too hasty. I spent a lot of late nights here in my hotel room every single day leading up to the next morning's lecture. So this year, I'm going to start way in advance. So months and months ago, I started reading and studying and making notes. And then yesterday, I finished making this presentation. So it turns out no matter how much prep you do, you could study for a lifetime on these topics and still find yourself at the last moment scrambling and seeking for the Spirit to decide, well, what of all of this amazing instruction matters the most to bring together. So I thought at least I could point to some of the references that I ran into that I found particularly compelling. And some of them are really quick and accessible. Take Professor Jamie Jensen. She's a professor in biology here at BYU. And she gave this devotional a couple of years ago on faith and science. It's fantastic. It's a 30-minute listen, or maybe a shorter read, and it's far worth your time investment if you're interested in the subject. And then I won't go through a full book review on all of these, but I do want to indicate this book in particular. This one I ran into a little late in my studies for this lecture series, and to be honest with you, I could have changed everything I planned on saying and made it all tie back to what is taught in this book. Not because what I'm going to talk to you about is suddenly irrelevant. It's I think, highly relevant and couched in scripture and the teachings of prophets. However, this book is a perspective shift. It's one of those that you read and you say, well, wow, I guess I never thought about it that way before. And I have this table thrown up there just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit. But the core premise is that everything we talk about with relation to truth, as we extract it from the scriptures, is typically based on what's called idea truth. Truth is something abstract, something that you have a process to access. And if you either have it or you do not have it. It's immutable, unchangeable. Whereas a person view of truth is to take truth as literally the Son of God. And if it's a person view of truth, then truth changes, not because the core principles are altered, but because the very truth itself is something that you have embraced as a point of direction and change. How can you possibly expect God as the ultimate truth to change you if it is immutable? So something about who God is what keeps us attached, rather than just what we know or what we don't know. So imagine that when it comes to having gospel questions, where you're uncertain whether this new nugget of truth, or what is taught as doctrine or truth, where it fits into the vast puzzle you've been assembling throughout your life. That's inconsequential if truth is a being, even the very being of Jesus Christ. So we'll come back to some of these principles, particularly on Friday, as we discuss knowing what we know and how we tie that together. But today, we will live very much in the idea view of truth land. And by the way, you should be happy. We're all very comfortable there. That's where we typically think about truth. And so we'll kind of build from that to something grander. Okay, So I like considering the divine connections between what has come about with respect to scientific discovery and technology and what we have as gospel source of truth. And even for those who have been inventors through the years that may not share similar religious or theological perspectives as we do, yet have recognition of God's hand, I think that that's an important thing to recognize. So, for instance, inventor of the laser, a critical technology to much of what we have today, Charles Towns, he says, you may well ask, just where does God come into this? If you believe in God at all, there is no particular where. He is always there, everywhere. He is in all of these things. To me, God is personal, yet omnipresent. Or Joseph Taylor, discoverer of the binary pulsar, so something in astrophysics. A scientific discovery is also a religious discovery. There is no conflict between science and religion. Our knowledge of God is made larger with every discovery we make about the world. I love that connection to knowledge of the world with knowledge of science and God. And then finally, the inventor of the radio, I believe it would be a great tragedy if men were to lose their faith in prayer. Without the help of prayer, I might perhaps have failed where I have succeeded in allowing me to attain what I have done. God has made of me merely an instrument of his own will for the revelation of his divine power. While this is not a universal aspect of scientists and technologists, it is also not an absent one. It's something that is worth being aware of, that there is recognition of that connection. So there's a parable I love. I won't only share it this first day because some of you have seen it before, and I'll share a different parable, just as goofy and silly and out of the brain of someone who spends too long thinking about scientific and engineering things. But for those who haven't seen this one, I'll go quickly through it. So in a world where there is very little known about fish, there lived a fish scientist who decided to move by a river and build a cabin by that river. That river was full of fish, and so the scientists would fish them out of the river. And he would study these fish. He would get them of all different sizes. He would dissect them and study their guts and eat them and study their taste and learn so many things about these fish. He knew he had to do what any self-respecting fish scientist would do: go to a scientific conference and present to everyone else who's definitely going to care about what he learned with respect to these fish. So he got up to the front, had this amazing laser pointer, talked about the bait he used and what the fish looked like and what they smelled like and all the details that he had been able to capture through his process of discovering the truth of the fish. The audience was amazed, wowed, oohs, ahs. And he got done with the presentation, was returning to his seat when another fish scientist got up to present. This fish scientist had also built a cabin, but this time by a lake. And instead of catching the fish and dissecting them and eating them, this fish scientist got scuba gear and dove into the lake, studied the fish in their natural habitat, learned about their life cycle, their behaviors, all of this grand and amazing information. The audience was amazed, except for the first fish scientist. He felt like everything that he had brought to light had suddenly been compromised by a completely ulterior motive of truth. The path to obtaining it, everything was wrong. And so he met this fish scientist in the hallway, and they had an intense debate about what the appropriate path to truth really was. How do you learn it, and what is it you find? And what ultimately is the fish? And so they battled and battled and battled, never coming to a consensus, only to return home, never realizing that they had been studying the same fish the whole time, that the river connected to the lake, and that all of the truths that had been gathered in the completely different methods of obtaining it contributed to one whole, one piece of knowledge that was better together than it was apart. I think of this as a lot like what we see in the world when it comes to science and religion, and that truth is really what brings these things together. They are not in any natural contradiction. In fact, Johnny Widsoe said, scientific truth cannot be theological lie. To the sane mind, theology and philosophy must harmonize. They have the common ground of truth on which to meet. So this connection has also been observed, and I'm just going to animate these in instead of reading them all to you, but these are other quotes from very well-known scientists over the years. And I love the Werner Heisenberg one of the inventors of quantum mechanics, says the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. There are simply answers out there that science will not reach. And recognizing that in our joint journey to truth is really, really critical. I also love this from Bob Millett. And I shouldn't remind you of this, but you all have decided to be here rather than listening to Bob Millett. But it's okay. He's teaching another class right after this. So it's okay to come back. But Bob Millett said, it is no coincidence that some of the greatest discoveries of human history have taken place during the last 2 centuries, and more especially during recent decades. We should not be surprised that technological developments and medical marvels and scientific discoveries should parallel the opening of the heavens foreseen by Enoch some 5 millennia ago. I love this. I've never seen this verse tied in the same way before. This is from Moses chapter 7. It says, and righteousness will I send down out of heaven, and truth will I send forth out of the earth, and righteousness and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood. So much truth and discovery comes out of the earth in our days, out of sources that may not on their face to you seem religious, and yet God is driving much of these developments, maybe even artificial intelligence chatbots. Who knows? We'll talk about that tomorrow. And this from Elder Nelson at the time during the dedication of the BYU Life Sciences building just across the street from here. There's no conflict between science and religion. Conflict only arises from an incomplete knowledge of either science or religion, or both. All truth is part of the gospel of Jesus Christ, whether the truth comes from a scientific laboratory or by revelation from the Lord. It is compatible. Okay. Now we're going to take all of that foundation and use it to make a diagram, because I'm an engineer and I think best in diagrams. And when I think about things from the scriptures that talk in a way that sounds like a diagram, I want to make a diagram. I mean, doesn't it feel natural when you hear a formula in the scriptures? It must want to be a formula. And so this is my way of doing that, to try and make sense out of this balance between truth, its sources, and its wholeness. Okay. So the diagram starts with the dot. And if you all had like a little desk with you, I would have handed everyone paper out and you'd put a little dot on the page. Okay. So this dot is the center of a circle. And you don't know that just by looking at the dot, but it's because I told you. So that's what the dot is. And carved off of that dot is a little slice, kind of like a slice of the pie. This is what I call some truth. This is the truth that is irrefutable. It's the truth that all of us as human beings have access to. It's the truth of the fact that we need air to breathe, that plants grow, the sun warms, we are alive. The Book of Mormon exists. I like pointing that out to youth that consider the Book of Mormon is real. It is real. It really is here. It exists. It's up to you to have to determine the divinity of that origin, but it is here, and there's no debate left for that. And so that some truth is where we all start, where we all work from. So this truth is part of that whole perfect circle that is the whole truth out there. And God is at the center, that little point that we began with, the center of all truth. So this quote from Elder Christofferson helps build this out. By these things, then, we know that truth exists, that it represents a fixed and immutable reality, that unaided, the quantity of truth that mortals can discern is relatively small, that we depend on the help of divine revelation to learn the truth of all things, and that we and God depend on truth to act and create. Otherwise, there is no existence. Elsewhere, we also learn that truth does not conflict with truth, but that indeed all truth may be circumscribed into one great whole. So that great whole is our perfect circle here. So here's where science comes in. Science may seek to explain more of the truth than can be proven. This would be in the form of things like theory, like drawing the circle with your eyes closed. So if we were doing this exercise together, you'd still have that little dot on your page and you'd have the little slice of pie scratched onto the page. And then I would say, okay, put your pencil right on the end point, right here where my laser is, and close your eyes and draw the circle. And you would probably end up with something that looks like this once the animation cooperates. Slowly, slowly. There it is. It would look something like this, right? And no matter how hard you try, two things would be true. One, your circle would not be perfect. And two, in most any case, you would not be able to help having God included. Whether he was still at the center of the circle depends on how good of an eyes closed artist you are, but he would have been in the circle. So even the most theoretical aspects of science have room for God included and within them. So here's that full truth circle again, so you can see the comparison. And let's talk about some of these regions. This region here is the region where the scientific truths didn't really capture. This is what I would call the things that science will never understand. This is believing in God, as we learned from King Benjamin, that that he's creator of all things, and that we cannot comprehend all the things that God can comprehend. This is like the why behind anything, which is never going to be accessible via science. And I like this comparison for just kind of getting a mental orientation about the vastness of what we don't know. Consider the fact that in the US alone, more than 60,000 PhDs are granted every year in the sciences and engineering. 60,000 people who say, I just learned something no one else knew ever. And that's happening every year. So there's so much that we have yet to discover. Okay, this region out here where science went way outside of the circle of whole truth, these are the things that science has wrong, that there's been exaggeration in some way. And, woe unto those who rest too heavily on their learning and think they are wise and hearken not to the precepts of the whole truth or to the Spirit. So this would be examples. I can dig into history. The famous one about hand washing that everyone thought was ridiculous for a number of years until ultimately it was determined it's not. Different medical practices that seem really crazy now, flat earth, clean water mattering, all of these examples that there was exaggeration or even incorrectness that had to be righted. So some of the reason for that being the case, that there's these exaggerations in science that don't align with real truth, actually has how science is reported to blame. So I give this example a lot. I've had several others happen. This just tends to be the funniest one, so I stick with it. So this is just a couple of years ago. In my research lab at Duke, I have PhD students that do amazing research work, and I get to go around and talk about it with folks. And we had this cool experiment we were doing. We were studying the use of nanomaterials. That's very much what they sound like. Really small materials that can do different types of things. In this case, they can behave electronically. And we took these materials and we put them into little glass jars to create inks out of them. And we print them out of our printer in my lab. And we print them into small electrical circuits on paper and different substrates. And this student had been developing an ink that you can print into these conductive, meaning it conducts electricity, lines without any baking in an oven. And that probably doesn't mean much of anything to you, but trust me, it's a super big deal. We were really excited about it. From the scientific point of view, no one had been able to do that before, that you can just print it and it suddenly becomes a solid line that conducts electricity without any high temperature. So he did something that I'm grateful for, but would have never given permission to do. It was one of those forgiveness approaches where he went to the lab one day and said, well, gosh, this is conducting right when I print it. It's made from silver. It's not toxic. At least I hope not. I'm going to just print it on my finger. Okay, so he showed up in my office one day and said, look what I did. And of course, I thought it was super cool, but I told him never do that again. And did you get a good video of it, right? And this was that video. So he had these two traces he printed on his finger, and then he used them to light up a little LED light on the end of his finger. So it showed that he could print something conductive electrically and integrate it on the skin. And it just kind of proved the core point we were trying to make scientifically. It was the flash to our otherwise purely scientific finding. So we did what you typically do. Besides publishing a scientific paper, we went to the university's press folks and said, hey, we did this super cool thing. And of course, they loved the video. And so they started pushing all types of things into the press. So what we said was that we developed a new ink for printing conductive features at room temperature. What they heard or reported, well, electronic tattoos and bandages with biosensors could become a reality. At least there's the qualifier of could included in the headline there, but the article really goes deep into all of these magnificent, fantastical things that we're suddenly going to be doing because now we print things onto skin. It gets even better. Someone else commented on the video that was posted on YouTube, mark of the beast, methinks. How could that possibly go wrong, right? And what was simply a very basic demonstration of printing something onto a finger once blew up into these world-ending fears way out of proportion. And then my favorite was when I was invited to be on a podcast that is based out of the UK. I had never heard of this before. It's called The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. And I didn't realize until about an hour before the podcast was set to be recorded that it's mostly about paranormal activity. And that somehow they saw this video and thought, this is a conspiracy. This is a connection, I think, to some of these. And you know what? They were really pleasant people. And it was actually a very fun conversation. But it just shows how far what we started with ended up going by the time it was consumable by the broader public. And, you know, even realizing this by having experienced it as a scientist over and over again, I'm still the first sucker in line for the Popular Science magazine rack and finding what is the coolest thing that's happening with new technology these days. Even though I know by the time it hits that broad media journal, it's been so heavily distilled from the true source of what was found or discovered that it's mostly science fiction. But it's hard to remember it when things are glossy and well-crafted and cool. And that makes it a noisy world, that part that we'll get back to tomorrow and the next day. Okay, coming back and wrapping up this diagram thing. So this is that whole diagram, the whole truth being the why and how and what and when that we can only find through God. So you remember these little tools that you used in elementary school? They were called a compass, and it allowed you to draw a perfect circle. Well, I want to take this compass idea and build it into a more complete version of this whole diagram. So compass does this. You hit the center point, and as long as you hold on to the center point, you can scribe a perfect circle from that center point, okay? So, and I'm not going to read all this, don't get scared, but in Alma 37, where we learn the most about the Liahona, hundreds of years after its miraculous use in Lehi's family leaving Jerusalem and making it through the wilderness, we learned from Alma what some of these details actually were. And what you find are things like I highlighted, that their course, the course they should travel would be dictated by this compass if they had faith in its ability to guide them, okay? That faith, believed that God could cause those spindles to point. Therefore, they had this miracle. I mean, of course it's a miracle. This thing showed up out of nowhere and it's guiding them. But the miracle was happening every day, day by day. And so they became slothful. The marvel wore off and they forgot to exercise their faith and diligence. And they did not travel in the direct course. And then he compares it. He says, okay, there's what really happened. What does this have to do with our spiritual journey? Our spiritual journey is also one that should be on a straight course, a course to eternal bliss, he says. And how do we stay on that course? The word of Christ will keep us on the course. And he reiterates down here the words of Christ. Okay, so let's take that straight course, direct, steady, unwavering. And keep in mind, I pointed this out just a moment ago, but when it comes to Liahona, to me, the most important takeaway is that something that at once was curious and we marveled at and we were changed by, suddenly, by familiarity, grows commonplace and becomes something that we forget to exercise faith in. Like the manna in the wilderness that lost its unique flavor over time, some of the miracles we have can end up this way. And I encourage you to give some thought to what those might be and figure out how to correct course, as it were, with that compass. Okay, so coming back to the diagram, in the same teaching from Alma 37, we learned that God, he has counsel and wisdom over all his works, and his paths are straight, and his course is one eternal round. Now, I've got to be honest, a little bit of in from the beginning here. This is where I started with this whole diagram. And I started there because how can you be on a straight course that gives you an eternal round? I didn't really feel like that made a lot of sense to me from a way of mapping that out. And so I took these two things, straight course, one eternal round, thought about it with this compass, and I realized, something about how we move in this world is probably not necessarily consistent with how we map it to God's realm and the realm of truth. So we move in what are called Cartesian coordinates. X and Y plane mostly, sometimes the Z plane where we climb stairs or jump, however small that may be. But maybe God moves differently. Maybe something like polar coordinates, in case you haven't seen them in a number of years or ever, they work in the same coordinate system, but instead of just moving based on three directions, they move based on a fixed direction that we call R, this length, and then an angle that is right here, theta or phi, that is being swept, okay? So the way this works is that if you were to move in a straight course by sweeping this angle, you would actually create a perfect circle. So if you fix the R and sweep the theta, you get a perfect circle off a straight course, one eternal round. So I don't know if that matters in terms of how God moves. I just know that helps make that verse make a little more sense to me. And Isaiah, after all, did have this amazing instruction in chapter 55 about God moving differently than us, right? God's ways are different. They're higher than our ways. And so if you think of this constant ray as that word of God, the words of Christ that were mentioned in Alma 37, suddenly you can have this word of God, this fixed word of God swept, and ignore the PowerPoint physics. It doesn't want to sweep the right direction. That's why it does this weird reverse sweep, but it creates a circle either way. And that is how you would get a straight path to obtaining the whole truth. Not a path that should veer, by the way, to the right or to the wrong. Alma 7:20 talks about God's path. It also says one eternal round there as well. And it says God's path does not veer from the right to the wrong, left or to the right, okay? So staying on that straight path leads ultimately to obtaining all of God's eternal truths, truth which is light. And if you do waver, your circle still might turn out looking something like this, something that veers you a bit out of the boundaries of what the whole truth would actually be. So bringing this all together, scientific truth and gospel truth are part of the same whole. Embracing the word of God with faith and action by actually moving forward and being unwavering is something that brings us greater truth. And we should be careful in all of this to not let understanding something diminish its divinity. That the more truth we gain, the more apt we may be to think that we know better or more, or have less reliance needed on God as the source. So what makes miracles miraculous? Skip straight to the chase. It's God. It's not whether you understand them or don't understand them. It's the fact that God is a part of them, that who he is as the ultimate truth is leading to those miracles occurring. Okay, so I want to get to my next little thing. So I'm animating these through rather than walking you through because they're largely reiterations of what I've just said to you. So I really want to cover my last parable though, because it's a new parable and I'm still getting used to it because it's going to be hard to leave the fish scientist behind. But this is something that when going through the prep for this whole lecture series, okay, what came out at the end of sitting and reading for hours upon hours and studying across a few weeks and feeling like there was way too much information to ever say half of it was the thoughts about this parable. And now this parable, it's weird. I'm not going to lie to you. In fact, I blame it on ChatGPT. I'll show you tomorrow why ChatGPT is to blame, but the original source of the parable is ChatGPT, by the way. It just started even stranger than where you're going to see it now. I helped get it into a normal place. But the reason why this kept coming to my mind is because I realized no matter what I can say today about the sources of truth and the foundations, or tomorrow about chatbots, or Thursday about noise, or Friday about knowing that you know, no matter what, this matters more than all of it. And so I had to find a way of saying it with a silly parable, because then you might remember it. So in a land far away, I'll use some of ChatGPT's language. It's very dramatic, ChatGPT, actually. So in a land far away, there's a land that is separated by a great chasm. And across this chasm is a single bridge, a bridge that is supported by two mighty pillars, one on either side of the chasm. On one side of the chasm is the land where the people live. On the other side of the chasm is a glorious place of peace and rest, a place that is known about by most, but only really accessed by some. Those who access this place by using the bridge are able to join with the few others there to find that peace that they long for amidst a noisy and crowded world. And so because this path means so much to them, over time, they began to adorn the bridge with decorations representing the trials they'd passed through, the discoveries they'd made, the important commandments they'd kept, all of the legacies of them as a people. In a way, the way they have kept the planks of the bridge and engraved and carved into it were symbols of all that truly defined who they were. It was part of what allowed them to access the peace. However, one day, a wise craftsman came to the bridge, crossing over to the place of peace, and upon reaching the middle, ended up feeling a slight tremor in the bridge. Because of his experience as a craftsman, he knew that the tremor was not normal and that there had to be some source. So he searched for it, removed some of the adornments, and found, to his surprise, cracks in the pillar that held the bridge. He immediately returned to the village where all the people lived, went up onto the mountain, and instructed them that there are cracks in the pillar. He said it for any and everyone who would hear. And most of them couldn't care less. A few of them gathered to hear the words of the wise craftsman. But even them, some of them couldn't help but think, it's not my decorations that are causing the issue. Certainly, he's not suggesting that the plank that I have so carefully cared for, or the rope that I've so meticulously secured, is something that's causing a problem here. But the few who listened and heard the craftsman, they returned quickly to the bridge. They found the damage, repaired the cracks, and sought to strengthen the pillars so that it would last the test of time. But whether the bridge will actually hold is completely dependent on the attention the people choose to give to the pillars. So what does all of this mean? Now that you've been in this fairy tale land, and thanks to ChatGPT and a little of me, let's define the different characters. First, our world and this place of peace and joy, now and forever, the peace and joy that can be found. Then we have, of course, you knew who the wise craftsman was, right? The prophet, the watchtower being carefully and continuously monitored. And what about the bridge? I'm going to suggest the bridge is the laws, the commandments, even the covenants that we make. All of the duties, all of the responsibilities we bear, all of the accomplishments we succeed in, and all of the difficulties we overcome. They are all marking the planks and the ropes of the bridge. So what are the pillars? Jesus said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Everything hangs on these two commandments. And in case that wasn't clear enough, consider President Nelson's message from this last conference about peacemakers, where he taught the Savior's message is clear. His true disciples build, lift, encourage, persuade, and inspire, no matter how difficult the situation. True disciples of Jesus Christ are peacemakers. You know these scriptures, so I don't need to read every verse, but have you thought of how weighty the impact is of what Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians and what gets re-emphasized by Mormon in the Book of Moroni? That though you do all of these things, speak with tongues, you end up having the gift of prophecy. You understand all mysteries and have all knowledge. If truth is knowledge, you've got all of it. And you don't have love for others, even in the pureness of charity. It's for nothing. Everything fails. No matter how well constructed the planks are, no matter how strong the rope, if you crack the pillars, it's for nothing. So for those of us who get caught up in the rightness of what we feel we found in this world, politically, medically, socially, it doesn't matter. Scientifically, if you allow your conviction to these temporary truths to govern the strength of the pillars, it will be for naught. And I say that with emotion because it's as much in the mirror as it is to you. I spend my life building planks. We all spend so much of our lives walking them. It can be difficult to keep in mind what holds them up. Also from Elder Nelson at the time, hence our highest priorities in life are to love God and to love others, or love our neighbors. Not find all truth, not ensure someone else finds that truth, not making sure they know they didn't find the truth. But to love them is the highest priority. Obedience to the second commandment facilitates obedience to the first commandment. Okay, let me close out in our last 10 minutes or so here with a couple of things that trouble me. Okay, so we'll pull away from the bridge for a moment, leave it there, because I wanted to make sure we covered it. And just coming back to our discussion of truth, who knows what from where was one of the little taglines I gave to this lecture. Because some of you may not be scientists, I'll tell you what, for me as a scientist, deeply troubles me. I'm troubled by these two things. I'm troubled by the fact that we are in a downward spiral as a country, and in some ways as a world, though I can speak less intelligibly about the impact globally. But as a country, with respect to our commitment of worship, going to church. I'm not talking about members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints exclusively. Of course I'm talking about them, us. I'm talking about everyone. I'm talking about all of our fellow men and what they choose to spend their time in these days. It's deeply troubling. Second, I'm troubled that confidence in science fell in 2022 at a time when our capabilities of discovering things scientifically have never been greater. Have you thought about this for a moment? Do you know what it's like to be a student of science let's take one field for an example. I want to study new types of electronics. It's subjective, it's where I work. So I want to do that. That seems like the world can be made of more and more helpful electronic things, okay? All of you, every person in here uses electronics every single day. So I might as well try to make those things better, right? That's a good ambition. I'm going to make them better. I'm going to make new electronic materials. I'm going to create ways to make things more energy efficient and smaller. Do you know what I have to do before I'm even able to start pushing the envelope to the next phase of what's not known? I need to understand what Albert Einstein did, what Heisenberg did, what Max Planck did. I need to understand the core concepts of materials that researchers across decades and even centuries have done before I even get to put footsteps on a path towards something new. We have such a breadth of what has been done that we must first grasp and then build on, that if anything, confidence in science for the fact that we have all of those resources to learn and to build on should be higher than ever before. The checks and balances more capable of being implemented. And yet, confidence fell. And by the way, the confidence is not a measure of confidence of the scientists. It's the measure from those who aren't. That the confidence they feel with their lack of comparable education or experience is higher or lower, depending on how you're interpreting the phrase, than those who have the experience. Think about that for a second. Does that mean I'm telling you, leave the room? Well, this scientist babbled on and told me I should trust everything that happens in science. I already told you what they did with the printing on the finger. Obviously, there are some caveats here, right? But just a broad recognition of the fact that there's some amazing things happening and that there is at the core of what may get spun up in media stories, the core are good people trying to do good things. You know, last year when I was here, someone asked me in the little question submission thing on Slido after this first lecture, what about COVID? And what about vaccines? And what about all these things? And I'm not going to tell you an answer to that. I'm not going to tell you definitive. Well, obviously it's this. See, you should listen to me. Plenty of other people have said all things with which you might desire to believe. There is evidence to support you in that belief out there. So what's troubling to me, and the comment I gave back to that question is, I know it sounds a little crazy, but scientists don't want to die either. Isn't that wild? Like, they actually don't. Like, the people that are trying to do things scientifically, they actually care about living too. And knowing so many of them from so many communities, medically, electrical, engineering-wise, all these spaces, I've yet to find one that just wants to kill people and just wants to find a way to make other people's lives total misery. And it's quite the opposite from what I'm observing. And is what makes it so confusing to me, how quickly the lack of confidence ends up developing. Okay. Oh, that cunning plan of the evil one. Oh, the vainness and the frailties and the foolishness of men. When they are learned, they think they are wise, and they hearken not unto the counsel of God, for they set it aside, supposing they know of themselves. Isn't that interesting? Because it didn't just set it aside. Setting aside is an action with an unavoidable consequence. If you set aside, in this case, God and science, or given what we learned earlier in this lecture, including from quotes from our current prophet, either one of those things, both of which give independent paths to creating a whole truth, we are setting them aside to suppose we know of ourselves. That is a pretty lofty position to claim. So are you an expert? When you think about your next conversation, whatever the topic is, consider the question first, are you an expert on this? It doesn't mean I don't think you should talk about something that you're not an expert on. It just might mean framing it a little differently. Oftentimes it's the framing that's the worst, not the painting that you're trying to put together for someone, how you're approaching it, not remembering the pillars of the bridge. So, are you though? I mean, when you think you're about to tell someone something, maybe ask twice. Are you? Remember this proverb, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, all of them, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Amazing, right? What is at the center of the truth circle that we are scribing? Because if it's not God, if it is supposing we know of ourselves, we're losing connection to the most vital piece of the whole truth. Don't ever let what someone says or does compromise your knowledge of who they are as a person and as a child of God. All right, this is one of my concluding verse, I think, to wrap this up. I could put this on the same slide as the last one, things that trouble me. Maybe this is a good way of saying the reason why it troubles me. Because I don't know about you, but even though there's been predictions of prophecies being fulfilled for the last days for many decades, it's scary how accurate Paul's description to Timothy feels when describing the last days and looking around at the world that we all are passing through at the moment. Know know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves. See a pattern there across several of these scriptures where the dependence is? Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. And then skipping a verse, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. If any of what we do to obtain or hold on to truth in this world is compromising of what God has instructed as the path to truth, we should reconsider. Reconsider what we do to get there and reconsider the validity of what we obtained in that process. So in conclusion, truth is common ground. I hope beyond just broadly classifying it as being accessed because of a scientific method or a gospel method, that you take this as a more holistic comment, that all truth, all understanding of the workings of God and of the world are something that can be unified into one great whole. That there's this ability, you may hate the diagram, you may hate diagrams, but I feel like I can sleep better knowing that you can be on a straight course and obtain an eternal round, that you can hold on to the truths of the words of God and use them to gain more truth in a path that does not turn from the right to the wrong. And then finally, my great hope that we rely on God and remember the two greatest commandments. The bridge parable should feel like this sidelong tangential distraction from everything I just talked about. That's totally okay. That's how it felt every time it kept coming back to me when I was reviewing anything that I might say in this lecture. So please keep in mind what our roles may be in maintaining those pillars. And while we still need to walk the planks there, we still need to have ropes to hold, the pillars are what keep the bridge there and give us access to peace and to truth. You guys have been amazing to listen. I hope you've submitted questions if you have them. And I testify to you that truth is accessible. And I hope to see you tomorrow. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.